Okay, the plane's in the hangar. Next thing I'm going to work on is the tail feathers. I've got an elevator here which apparently goes on before the rudder, and I need to put the trim servo in. It's been a while since I've been working on these tail feathers, but the trim servo I believe goes below this cover, but there's some pages on it, some manual pages, kind of in the boy, these pages I haven't looked at for years. Back in section 05 is the servo trim indicator parts page. But I'll read through that and see what we go from there. I found my trim servo in a box marked trim servo. Haven't touched this in about 3 years, and it was inside with some instruction manuals. Okay, as I was setting this in, I assumed this was going to turn, and that was going to turn the buckles in and out, but then it didn't line up with here. And I did some research, and it actually goes in this way. This piece here actually slides in and out, and this is just the extension in the back. So it goes in this way, and then that's going to line up with here, and then this piece goes in and out. The Ray Allen instructions say that these holes can be drilled out to a 6/32 panhead, but RANS gives you 8/32 machine screws and 8/32 receptacles. So, but they just drill out to the 8/32. Then I've hooked up these 2 attachments with a push rod in the middle, and I've left this cotter pins not bent because you may have to adjust this. It looks like it's in a fairly contracted position, so I have it set with a little bit of trim on it, but when I hook the motor up and figure out the range, then I'll have to readjust it most likely. I'm using a 9-volt battery to test the trim motor, using the gray and white wire which is coming off the toggle switch. What I'm going to do is I'm extending this all the way out, and that should be the full trim one direction, and that'll help me set the distance on this. Then I'll go back all the way the other direction, and we should have a good range, but I'll play with it. This looks like it's extended pretty much. The screw's almost in the back. This looks like it, so I think I'm going to have to extend this a little further because this should be in a little further trim position while it's in the full extended position. I think the next step to get my horizontal stabilizer on is I've got to close out the skins and the rivets. As I've done throughout my build, I don't close things out until I'm sure I don't have to get back in there again. That's my trim wire coming through. The white wire is a pull wire in case I wanted to put a light in the rudder. I can pull wiring through with that. But either way, it's time to close this out. I think I got to match drill this piece onto here and then just rivet the skins, and then I can move forward with that horizontal stabilizer. Okay, well that gets the tail cone skins all riveted. Just because there's 3 or 4 different size cherry rivets, AAPQs. The corners you go through some cage gussets, so they're a little thicker. Just different size rivets. These are the big ones up here. These are 44s up here. But that gets that tail cone all riveted. I think the next thing is to get these guys in and then get the elevator on. You need to go back in the text back to the horizontal stabilizer section where you built the stabilizer. And then on the 3rd page, I think they talk about the attachment here. And then in the parts manual, you've got the different bolts and hardwares and the bushing that goes into these 2 incident adjustments. So this is where you go back to. Boy, I haven't seen this page in years. I need to get these incident adjustment bushings pushed in. They kind of go... They go in here and they allow the adjustment, I guess, after you get the stabilizer on. These bushings are not going to fit in here. They're just a little bit too big, so it looks like I've got to I've got to take down the outside of the bushing, and then this has got to get bored out to a 1/4 for that bolt. So there's a lot of fabrication that has to be done to get these to fit. Okay, to get this bushing to fit and cut and drilled out, I just filed off a little bit off each side. And by filing off each side, it allows it to, there's the flat side, slide right in there, just barely snug, and it just fits in there. Cut it to length so it's just flush on either end, and then bored out to a 1/4 for the bolt. Okay, I'm trying to get back into the order of the manual so I'm not skipping around. And it talks about getting these tips into the end of the stabilizer before you move on. So I'm going to trim these and fit them into the end of the stabilizer. Okay, next step is to set these bushings so that they are 1/8 of an inch up from the bottom for the Titan engine. Rotax is down from the top. So you've got these set screws here, so you want to adjust those so that this is 1/8 of an inch up. On the final setting, you're going to use blue lock tape to lock it in. I don't know, maybe I'm overthinking things. It says use the cap screws to set the bushings 1/8 from the bottom of the slots for the Titan. So set the bushings 1/8 from the bottom. So we come over to the bushings, and here's my question on the 1/8. As I measure 1/8, are we measuring, when it says set the bushings, typically I would think you'd measure it from the center where the bolt would be. That's 1/8 from the center of the bushing. But this won't go down low enough for the center to be 1/8. The only thing I can imagine is that you're measuring 1/8 to the bottom of the bushing, not to the center. And that's the only way it's going to work. So that's the way I'm going to do it. Okay, I've got to drill out these to a 1/4 inch. The doubler plate's not drilled out, so that's got to get sized up and drilled out. And then on the stabilizer, the forward holes get drilled out to a 1/4, and then in the back, only one gets drilled out to the 1/4, and you final size drill the other one after you install it. The next step is to set the stabilizer in place and insert these bolts from in through here using, there's a washer here and a large washer here. And my hand, I've got a medium size hand, I just barely can get in there and get the wrenches, but just enough. I don't think I've got any blood yet, but it's close. So a small hand would be better to get in here. But then you put these two on, and then you're going to put the one on in the back, not two, but just the one. Okay, these bolts are in. Remember to torque them. The AN4s are 50 to 70 inch-pounds. Okay, the horizontal stabilizer is on. These bolts are in. Remember, they get torqued. They're AN4s, so it's 50 to 70 inch-pounds. This back bolt also goes in, but there's a gap in here that you've got to fill with washers. I ended up using two thicks and a thin, and getting them in there is a real pain. What I ended up doing was super gluing the washers together, and then I stuck them to a piece of blue masking tape, slid the masking tape in, used my needle nose to push it in there, and then ran the bolt through. So kind of a trick to get it in, but it worked. And then I took two thicks and a thin, I glued them together, and I'm going to put them in a bag and mark them, because those will get done later, but you still need to fill that gap. And this is the bolt you don't put in right now. I think you do it after you put your wings on. But for now, that brings us up to date on the horizontal stabilizer. Oh, one other quick note. The bottom set screw on this has to get set with Loctite blue. And after you get it on, you can still get in there through here with a Allen wrench and unwind it a little bit, get the Loctite on it, and wind it back up again. Well, that wraps up this episode. The build time for this section was 8.2 hours. That brings my build time to 1,460.9 hours. If you do the math for my previous episodes, you know they're off by a little bit. Hey, how's it going? There's about 7.5 hours of time in there for additional projects that I didn't put in my content. That included adding some Adele clamps to the wirings, getting it away from the muffler, cleaning up the wires a little bit around the engine. I added some stiffeners to the boot cowl on the side. There was a little too much pillowing, so I put those in. I painted the boot cowl black. That required some sanding, some priming, some cleaning, and then some painting. And then I wire tied the alternator and the flywheel bolts, which was required. So I didn't film all that because that's just kind of, but all of that took about 7 hours. So this section was 8, and my total comes up to 1460.9. I've got a quick story just as a reminder to you pilots out there. I had I don't want to say it was a close call, but it was a wake-up call on a pattern, some pattern work. I was doing some practice takeoff and landings. I hadn't done short field and soft field in a while, so I was practicing. And it was a right-hand pattern traffic, and there were 4 of us in the pattern, I think. It was a little bit busy that day. Someone called in, they were doing a straight in, an instrument approach, and they were doing a straight in, it's uncontrolled. And they were going to end up being number 2 behind another plane. And as I had taken off, I heard someone call downwind, and I didn't put all the pieces together, but there was a plane on final. This guy was straight in, was behind him. I was still on my downwind. I called my base in, my right-hand base behind him, announced I was going to be number 3. Not a word on the frequency. And all of a sudden I look up and there's another plane coming in on final behind this guy that had done the straight in. And this is the one that I guess it called downwind when I first lifted off on my departure. And he didn't make any more calls in the pattern. And I looked up and there he was, and I was coming in, he was coming down, and he clearly had right away. So I peeled off to the left and then headed out. At that point, I wasn't sure if there was someone behind me on downwind, so I just went out and announced I'd do a new 45 into the downwind. But boy, seeing that guy on final was a wake-up call. I'm glad I had my eyes outside the window. I was surprised he didn't make any comments to either calling his pattern or when I'd called base saying, "Hey buddy, do you see me?" Nothing, not a word. So not everyone is diligent with their call-outs and pattern work, especially in uncontrolled. Don't assume everyone's going to make all the appropriate calls, and keep your eyes outside the cockpit. It wasn't close, but it was a wake-up call. So with that, thanks for watching, and remember, dream it, just build it.